morning, Big Creek Church. For those who like to follow along, we will be in the book of Job, chapter 40 and 41. That's the book of Job, chapter 40 and 41. And today we're going to cover these two amazing beasts or creatures that are mythological, legendary proportion creatures named Behemoth and Leviathan. And it is God himself who brings up these creatures, and some theologians debate whether these creatures were real or they represented something. And we're going to cover what God intended to speak about these creatures about. And in a way, they are very real. And these creatures impact our lives every day. We're going to read how they represent chaos in our life. And church, I want us to understand something before we dive here into the book of Job. This is a very old book, and the culture of this time, thousands of years ago, didn't view things like you and I do today. Today, you and I in our culture, largely shaped by Jesus Christ himself, we view things from a morality perspective. We view things as right and wrong, good and bad. And certainly ancient cultures had conceptions of these things, but they looked more at the world and the idea of order and chaos. And to them, things were right when they were ordered and functioning, and things were wrong when things were chaotic. And they looked to the gods or God to appease the gods, to bring order and function to their societies. To put in perspective, ancient man would be in fear that nature was out of alignment if it didn't rain and allow their crops to grow, and they would have to appease their god or gods to bring about order and rain. Or if there was a pestilence, if there was sickness sweeping the tribe, again, they would say, nature's disorder, it is chaos, and our life is on the line, the survival of our tribe is on the line. And again, they would try to appease the gods or their god to bring about order. So they viewed chaos as the enemy, and they knew, at least somewhat intrinsically, that there was a God that they need to be in line with for things to operate and function properly. So they viewed the world in those terms more so than we think of morality today. And Job, as those of you who've been here for many years know, this is my favorite book. Job was a righteous man. He was a good guy. He had a reverence and respect for the one true God, and he worked hard and was obedient to God, and he had built a massive amount of wealth. He had a lot of land, a lot of cattle, and a lot of buildings, a lot of workers, and he was blessed with 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, if I remember right. And God had protected him. It tells us in Job chapter 1 that he put a hedge of protection around him. Well, Satan goes to God and says, listen, God, Job is only obedient to you and good because you protected him from the chaos of this world, because you put a hedge of protection around him. So Job and God discuss things, and he allows Satan to demonstrate what he perceives to be his point by removing that hedge of protection around him and allowing the things that Job has to be taken. But God put strict orders on Satan that he cannot take his life. And certainly Satan would bring a lot of disorder, a lot of chaos to Job's life. He would take all his wealth, kill all his cattle and livestock, take away all his servants. Worse, he would take away his 10 children, his 7 sons and 3 daughters. And then he would even take away his health. And Job was in such a dire state at that moment. His life was true chaos. Everything bad that could happen seemed to happen to him. And Job's friends would come and console him and talk to him and discuss things. And they would come to a conclusion, one that many of us come to today. Job, if all these bad things are happening, if all this chaos is occurring in your life, then you're not appeasing God. You're not obedient to God, and he's bringing this as punishment to you. You need to get right with God to bring order back to things. Or, because Job was so adamant that he had done nothing wrong, his friends began to allude to the fact, well, maybe God himself is unjust. And see, for this society, it is important that if they did the right things, if they performed the right orders and right rituals and appeased God in the right way, that order be brought to their tribe, be brought to their life. How can you live a life where you can function and people can live and survive and have a society, a healthy, productive society, if there isn't order, if chaos is allowed to reign? How can you operate? And that's what Job's friends say. This God's out of order if he's not preventing this chaos in your life. And then we get to chapters 38 and 39, which I would advise you go home and read it. It's some of the most beautiful poetry in our Bibles, and it's God contending with Job. Who Job basically implies that God is wrong for allowing these bad things to happen to him, and God would appear to Job and question him, where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? Where were you when I created everything you see? Where were you when I created the oceans, the land, the sun, the moon? Where were you when I controlled these constellations that you see in your sky every night? Where were you whenever I designed the migration patterns of birds and all the animal life in the world, where I was in control of all these things? If you have such knowledge and understanding of these things, tell me, Job. And Job realized that he was arguing with the creator of the cosmos. And he realized, he was humbled in that moment, that he really doesn't have even a little bit of an understanding of how things work. He understood that he is but a grain of sand among all the beaches in the universe compared to the knowledge and depths of God. Now this is unique because Job, in earnest, he is suffering. There's a lot of chaos in his life. He's sick. He's lost all of his children. He's lost all his wealth. Everything he's worked for, all the things he has done in life, with this belief that if I do the right things, I should prosper and have a good life. His whole worldview has been shattered, and now chaos is reigning. So he's gone to God. What is going on, God? And certainly in our lives, when chaos reigns in our life, when we're going through issues, when we're going through sickness, when we're going through financial struggles, when we're going through personal relationship problems, we're going through all this, we question God, where are you at in the midst of this chaos in my life? Especially when we think and have belief that we're doing the right things and chaos still reigns in our lives. So God comes to him and says, Job, you can't possibly understand and comprehend the depths of God's knowledge and why he does the things he does. So we pick up in chapter 40. It says, moreover, the Lord answered Job and said, shall he that contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. So he says, Job, you're contending with God right now. I'm going to ask you a question, Job. You're going to answer it. Job says in verse 3, it says, Job answered the Lord and says, behold, I am vile. What shall I answer thee? I will lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer, yea, twice, but I will proceed no further. So while Job doesn't have an understanding or an answer to why chaos and all these problems are raining down on him, he does understand that he has no right to question God. He has no right to tell God what or how things should run. He's the one that made Job, after all, and made the cosmos. But God's not done with Job. And he's about to bring up these two amazing beasts and the chaos they represent. This is what God says to Job. He says, then answered the Lord unto Job out of the whirlwind and said, verse 7, gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and declare thou unto me. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Hast thou an arm like God, or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud and abase him. Look on every one that is proud and bring him low, and tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together, and bind their faces in secret. Then I will confess unto thee that thy own right hand can save thee. Wow. Basically, God says, when you can save your own self, when you can control your own life, when you can control the evil that is in this world, then come contend with me. Job is understanding that he has no power over the chaos in his life. And he's starting to understand that he needs to depend and trust in the power, the sovereignty, and the love and grace of God. And God continues on here, and he brings up these amazing beasts that we're going to talk about here. He says, God still contending with Job, he says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar, and the swins of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass, his bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reeds and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of this brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh of a river, and hasten not. He thrusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierced through the snares." So God says, behold this massive beast, this huge, literally called a behemoth, of a beast. Now, many theologians and many Christians have debated, what is this beast he's talking of? Is it a hippo? Is it an elephant? Some of even suggest perhaps it was an ancient dinosaur, a brontosaurus, or one of the big, large dinosaurs. And all these people that try to identify this beast are missing the point entirely. God is offering an illustration of this massive, powerful beast that if it ran through our streets here today, it would crush our buildings, it would destroy our infrastructure. But yet God can control this chaotic beast, and this giant, massive beast he has eating grass as an ox. Now I can't help but, again, in my studies, to think of something amazing. Again, God is illustrating that this behemoth represents chaos, and how God controls that chaos, how God puts boundaries on chaos. And he talks about how this massive beast eats grass like an ox. I thought of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the Babylonian Empire at the time of Israel's exile from Judea. Here Nebuchadnezzar was this powerful king of an evil empire, and it was a world empire. It was the most powerful kingdom in the world at that time. And God used Nebuchadnezzar and his empire to chastise or to punish the nation of Israel for their worshiping of false gods and betraying him, and he pulled them into their kingdom. He allowed Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom to take over Judea, the southern part of Israel. And Nebuchadnezzar got this idea in his mind that he was a great and powerful king, and he was deserving of accolades and greatness, and he boasted about his greatness. And many people in the world would say Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful man on the world. But to the Jewish people that had just been taken captive by him, he was a force of chaos, a force of immeasurable power that wreaked havoc on them. But when Nebuchadnezzar bragged that he did all these things on his own and he was a man of his own merit, God would take away his mind and would render him, this great powerful king, as a beast walking on all fours in the fields eating grass like an animal. And what God is demonstrating is what the world perceives as chaos and power that we can't stop. Nebuchadnezzar, this king of the Babylonian Empire that destroyed southern Israel, now God said, look how much powerful I am. I made him eat grass in the fields as an ox. So Behemoth, we can point out certain creatures it may be, but the point is it represents chaos and God's power and control over that chaos in our life. So when God says to Job, behold Behemoth, I control him. I set boundaries on the chaos that he wreaks. But he continues with his example, one that's more well known, not only in the Bible, but throughout history of mankind. In chapter 41, he says, still continuing with Job, he says, canst thou draw out Leviathan, which is this large serpent sea beast that was feared not only by ancient Israel, but by many cultures in the ancient Near East. He says, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Will thou take him for a servant forever? Will thou play with him as with a bird, or will thou bind him for thy maidens? Shall the champions make a banquet of him? Shall they part him among the merchants? Canst thou fill his skin with barbed irons, or his head with fish spears? Lay thy hand upon him. Remember the battle, do no more. Behold, the hope of him is in vain. Shall not one be cast down even at the sight of him? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand before me? Who hath prevented me that I should repay him? Whosoever is under the whole heaven is mine. So God points out Leviathan. Again, this massive sea serpent beast that some people believe is real. But again, the point is what it illustrates here. For the people of ancient Israel and the ancient Mesopotamian area that they lived in, this sea serpent was very much real. It represented, again, the chaos in the world. And God is once again saying, I control that chaos. You can't do it, Job. Nobody in this world. It takes God to rein it in. He says, you can't put a hook in the jaws of chaos. You can't subdue it. You can't stop it. And it's amazing the illustration God's using here. And I'm going to get a little bit deep here. But you look at these two illustrations. One is chaos represented in the sea, and one is representing chaos in the land, in the wilderness. If you look at Israel on a map, to its west is the Mediterranean Sea. And Leviathan represents the chaos that is to the west of Israel. And to the east is the Arabian desert wilderness, the barrenness and the chaos that reigns there. But God has put borders up, preventing the chaos from coming to his people, to his land, as long as they're obedient and trust and believe in him. It is God that stops the chaos in our lives. And for Job, as we read in the beginning of the book of Job, right there in chapter 1, even Satan recognizes that Job was so great and accomplished because of the hedge of protection around him, because God put boundaries on the chaos that was allowed to reign in Job's life. Now understand, this culture that is writing this book and preserving it for us to read today, other cultures around Israel also had beliefs in these ideas of these chaotic beings and how their gods dealt with them. In fact, if you read the Baal cycle, this is the Canaanite people, the people that worship the god Baal, the god that gave Israel so much trouble, the god that even some Israelites would betray God and worship. In their literature, it talks about Baal fighting this chaotic god sea serpent named Lotan. And in their literature, their religious beliefs, they believe that Baal subdued the chaos caused by the sea serpent. And then you read the Babylonian creation story, the Enuma Elish. They believe that their god Marduk, he contended with a primordial chaos monster that was also a serpent, a lot like Leviathan, named Tiamat. And that their god subdued the chaos that was in the world. Well, now this is going to be an interesting one as I talk to you about it. But Egypt, in Egyptian mythology, you may have heard of the sun god Ra. That was their main god. Of course, they depended on the sun to arise every day. And they believed that Ra rose every day as the sun. And when the sun would descend and set, they believed Ra went into the underworld, kind of like their idea of hell, and fought a serpent-like being named Apotheosis. That's a pretty evil-sounding name. And he would wrestle with the chaos of the night and the underworld. And every day, Ra would be triumphed when the sun would arise again. And they worshiped that god. But their god had to continuously deal with chaos every day to allow the sun to rise. Now, why this is so interesting is a lot of people don't have that understanding, that ancient Near East culture. When you go back to the plagues of God over the land of Egypt, if you read in Exodus chapter 12, verse 12, God says he does these plagues, particularly the last plague of the death of the firstborn son of every family, to prove his power over their gods. Well, you look at the ninth plague, and what was the ninth plague? It was darkness for 3 days. And what he was telling the nation of Egypt is it was not their God that contended with the chaos in this world, but God himself, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, that dealt with the chaos in the world, and he was more powerful than any god that they can conceive. So he had power over Ra, and their belief that he brought the sun up every day by blocking it out for 3 days. So it is God that subdues the chaos in our life. It is God that contends with that. It is God that solves that problem. And as Job is presented with these two amazing beasts, Behemoth and Leviathan, and God illustrating that it is he that sets boundaries on the chaos in this world, Job now understands that he needs to trust in the power and providence of God. In chapter 42, it says, Job answers the Lord and says, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholding from thee. Who is it that hideth counsel without knowledge? That's what God asked him. Therefore have I uttered that I understood not things too wonderful for me, which I knew not. Now, this was written thousands of years ago, at least a millennia before Jesus Christ came. But now we know that Jesus Christ has truly subdued the most chaotic thing in our life. That's sin and death. He's put boundaries in our lives where sin and death no longer have hold on our lives. We understand things too wonderful for us. Our God has loved him so much that he took on chaos itself, took on death itself to save us. And we need to trust in him. So I summarize this sermon simply by saying we still have chaos in our lives. Chaos is when you go to that doctor's appointment and you get that cancer diagnosis. Chaos is that unexpected call on a Tuesday evening that a loved one has gotten in a car wreck and their life has changed forever. Chaos is getting that notice that you lost your job and the mortgage is due. Chaos is that strained relationship between you and a dear loved one in your family. Chaos is the war and famine and all the multitude of issues we deal in the daily course of life. And we wonder, what can we do about that chaos? How can we stop that chaos? And in doing so, we miss the point. We can't stop it. We can't solve it. You need to trust in the one who can. The one who subdued Behemoth. The one who put a hook into the jaws of Leviathan. And I love how Leviathan is actually in other scripture, including the book of Isaiah. Leviathan is directly correlated to Satan himself. The same serpent that was in that garden all the way back in the beginning. The same serpent that brought chaos to our lives. God has defeated him. God has defeated all the chaos in our life. And although we contend with it still in this life, we need to trust that there is a God much more powerful than these beasts and much more powerful than any chaos that reigns in your life. So as I have Donna come up here to dismiss us out in music, if there's anybody contending with that chaos in your life, if you're struggling with that and struggling in finding where God is in the midst of all this chaos in your life, this altar is always open and we'd love to pray with you. As always, the doors to Pea Creek Church are always open to anybody who'd like to join our little congregation. Thank you all so much.